高雄的副会长甲这个现在会长徐会长，拜托我这主持这个姚树忠教授的纪念奖的这个研究奖的这个奖者。这条教授继续了以后，教授会有剩两个奖，一个是纪念奖。今日早起咱第二次是第2届这个纪念奖的得主一个大家吴明英教授，这是第2届。伫研究奖这方面，每年两个得奖的得主，一个是 Doris Chen， 伊下另外一个人，我演讲另外一个是彭英双，伊彭英双比你问我要请伊来。Doris 你若看这个咱 program 内底24页的简介内底讲到，伊即摆现在是Wichita State 的副教授，伊专长是这个伊是 major history， 但是 East Asia Study 是伊专长。这个对内底无写是讲伊捌出一本书 ，Illinois State， University of Illinois Press 捌出一本书，伊写这个 Women in 20th Century Taiwan 这个内底伊有写到这个比较个证据，所以伊有一个背景。这阮教授会这个研究奖，Doris 是蔡英文也阁不是总统，是民进党的主席。所以 Doris 经这个队伍，甲阁也是讲教授会互伊这个 award， 甲蔡英文当做总统，可能甲伊当选。Doris 有一个真趣味所在我唔知影讲咱在地有啥物人捌去非洲大街，捌去非洲大街人请你来唱，无啦我也无看到，可能有人去非洲佚佗啦，你要佚佗着。伊住个 Lagos，Nigeria 一年，细汉的时阵初中去遐，因爸爸去Nigeria 住一年。这走来美国的时阵就是迄种做着，住伫波士，伊也久是阮波士一个中央。所以我这边讲要介绍倒来就是，我讲我甲伊若久甲因经较认个地方，因为伊甲伊也住差不多3年关，甲因爸爸来，可能1年因爸爸来以后，到摆对Nigeria转来美国以后，因差不多可能要搬出去，甲美波士读中，读到高中了以后，再去读大学。即摆我拄仔讲这个一个 interesting history， 一个 perspective， 一个 translational perspective， 对台湾大汉教授中去 Nigeria 1年，再来 Boston 美国读书，这第一点。第2点我问伊这阿舅这个金龙的，有啥物较趣味的故事，我才知影讲 Doris 的，伊唔知影，我你唔通甲 Doris 讲。你就唔知，是讲吼。因为伊踮咧台湾来到遮是所中做中文的样，伫阮兜看书评的台湾人的这个台湾人400年史，400年史这个代志，所以我嘛唔知影在地内底有要听迄句讲读过这个书评的台湾人的400年史。我想可能咱较侪可能迄阵还未写了，所以咱听迄句是书评还未写了迄本书，所以咱看袂到。但是这是 Doris OK， 所以我袂阁提讲，我请 Doris 来跟。
Dr. Lee's introduction. As you can tell from his introduction, I'm actually 1.5 generation because technically I came to the United States and settled down first in the Boston area when I was about 12 years old. So if you don't mind, I use English to do this introduction to talk about Tsai Ing-wen's 世界观. And whenever it's relevant, I would also try to use Mandarin or Taiwanese. So, I will just talk about Tsai Ing-wen's analysis of Taiwan's status in the international community, because this is an issue that I'm sure we are all very aware of. Okay, and in the year 2009, Tsai Ing-wen published this book in Chinese called 当代政治思潮. Okay. And in this book, she defined Taiwan as an intermediate state. Okay. And this is a political science term in international relations that's translated into Chinese. It's called 中介性的国家. And with alternative sovereignty. Okay. But if you look at Tsai Ing-wen's background, we all know that she got her PhD in political economy and in London School of Economics. And one of her colleagues, his name was Christopher Hughes in London School of Economics. And Christopher Hughes was the first person to use this term intermediate state to define Taiwan's international status. We all know that Taiwan's international status is very unique. Okay? Not too many countries, if at all, has this kind of situation, where we have de facto independence. That means we have our own army. We don't pay taxes to Beijing. We have total autonomy. We have our own central government. We have all the trappings of a nation state. That means the Taiwanese govern themselves in actuality, de facto independence. But we don't have de jure independence. We all know that, Panini said that, in some of his books too. It's like under international law, Taiwan does not fit all the criteria of a nation state in the sense of being a country that has enjoyed international recognition. Like we are not a member of the United Nations, and we all know that one of the major reasons that Taiwan cannot join the United Nations is because in this 当代政治思潮, Tsai Ing-wen was very perplexed, and you can almost say she was very bothered by this predicament. That in 1971, the ROC government, in Taiwan, was replaced by the PRC. The China seat, there's only one China seat, and Taiwan was replaced by the PRC. So that makes it really difficult for Taiwan to get back into the United Nations without actually declaring independence. But because of this situation with China, we all know having about 1,000 missiles aiming at Taiwan in recent years, it's very difficult for the Taiwanese to have full confidence that a war might not happen. We all know this whole story, so I don't need to go in great detail. But in 当代政治思潮, Tsai Ing-wen was very perplexed by this problem of not being able to declare independence. So how do you maneuver within this limited international space in an international community? For instance, how do you take into account Taiwanese people's long-standing aspiration for self-determination, while still maintain Taiwan's de facto independence, and still preserving peaceful coexistence with China? Okay, because this is also one of the expectations of the US government, is that Taiwan needs to preserve this peaceful coexistence with China. Okay? And so DPP then take all these into consideration and came out with the status quo stance. 维持现状. We all heard about that. In 2016 presidential election, Tsai Ing-wen kept re-emphasizing the importance of 维持现状. Okay. But then we all know that Taiwan also needs to deepen and expand a variety of relationships with more countries worldwide without actually declaring de jure independence. Okay. So Tsai Ing-wen's, one of Tsai Ing-wen's solution is, we all know 新南向政策. We've been talking about that also in this conference. Different speakers have a different perspectives and angles of looking at this 新南向政策. And let's compare briefly with the former President Li Denghui's 南进政策. We all know that when he was president back in the 1990s, he also had a similar term that he used to describe his drive of encouraging Taiwanese businessmen to invest in Southeast Asia or to expand trade ties with Southeast Asia. But this particular Nanjing Zhengce in the 1990s was primarily economic in focus. Okay? But in addition to the economic focus of Nanjing Zhengce, Tsai Ing-wen's 新南向政策 has more components to it. Okay? She wants to deepen cultural exchanges between Taiwan's civil society with its counterparts in Southeast Asian countries. And this could be done by granting visa waivers for tourists and business people from certain ASEAN countries. Those are, I think in Chinese it's called 东协十国, okay, in Southeast Asia. So, and this particular visa waiver program differs significantly from KMT's visa waiver program. Okay, the KMT under Ma Ying-jeou's government from 2008 to 2012, they also have visa waiver programs for certain countries. But these countries are mainly countries such as Malaysia and Singapore, where there's a lot of Huaqiao. Okay, so they favor Huaqiao, basically, give them visa waiver to come as tourists or business people to Taiwan. Whereas Tsai Ing-wen's vision is more universal. You don't have to be Huaqiao, okay, as long as your country is neutral or at least friendlier to Taiwan. Then we will give you visa waiver to come as tourists or as business people, okay, without having to worry about whether you are of Chinese descent or not. Okay. And Tsai will also diversify Taiwan's trading partners, we talked about this also, to include democracies such as Indonesia and India, rather than solely dependent on China's economy for investment, trade, and tourism. Okay. And the choice of Indonesia and China is also, and India, okay, Indonesia and India is also very interesting, okay, because Indonesia, as we know, is a country that has some trade and business ties with China, okay, but because of some territorial and maritime disputes with China in recent South China Sea controversy, Indonesia tends to be critical of China's expansion to South China Sea too. Okay, so Indonesia is one of those countries where they might give more space for Taiwan to maneuver, in bilateral relationship between Indonesia and Taiwan. And Indonesia, by the way, is also the largest country in population and economy in Southeast Asia. So that's another reason. And another plus thing is that the new Indonesian president, he's very democratically minded, and he's also friendlier to Taiwan. Okay, so all these are good possibilities for the Tsai Ing-wen administration. And we all know that India has border disputes with China. Okay, so India is no friend of China historically. And India is also the world's largest democracy. So Tsai Ing-wen's vision is really to have closer cultural ties and economic ties with larger democracies of kind of similar political system as Taiwan, okay? Instead of solely relying on China as a trading partner or investment partner. And we all know that Tsai Ing-wen also would like Taiwan to join the second round of talks for the TPP, Trans-Pacific Partnership. But as we know from the presidential election in the United States, that the Trans-Pacific Partnership is, for the meantime, at some kind of a dead end, okay? Because we know Bernie Sanders, that just dropped out recently, he's at the left wing of Democratic Party. He's very much against Trans-Pacific Partnership. We know Donald Trump is against it. again, the Republican candidate. And with Hillary, is an interesting case. Hillary Clinton, she was one of the architects of Trans-Pacific Partnership when she was Secretary of State. But now, with both sides, you know, the left, Sanders on her left, and you have Trump on her right, both are against Trans-Pacific Partnership. So now she said, well, I'm also against it. You know, I would like to revise it in a major way before I will reconsider it. Okay, so that she can grab supporters from both sides, okay, for her presidential campaign for November of this year in the US, of course. So Trans-Pacific Partnership is also in a somewhat of a dead end in the US Congress for the time being. So theoretically and ideally, Taiwan should join, of course, because Taiwan needs this kind of bilateral, multilateral economic ties with the rest of the Pacific countries. But in actuality, since the United States is one of the leaders, is actually the lead leader of Trans-Pacific Partnership, and ironically, the US is probably the one that's going to undermine it, even though it's the one that started it. So for the time being, TPP is just not going to go anywhere, okay, because of that. So let's talk about the last item on this outline. Tsai Ing-wen also encouraged YG Xinliang from Southeast Asia to speak their native languages with their children at home, okay, so that they can be potential diplomats in Taiwan. Okay? So this is a new perspective from her observation that YG Xinliang can actually be a diplomatic asset for the for Taiwan. Okay? And we heard from Tian Qiujin yesterday that she also said that, you know, YG Xinliang can also be encouraged to be potential tour guides for Southeast Asian tourists in Taiwan. Because not everybody, you know, not all Southeast Asian tourists in Taiwan can speak English or understand English. So we really need more tour guides that's certified, that can speak Southeast Asian languages. If we really want more of them to come and, you know, be tourists in Taiwan. Okay, so let's talk about some of the challenges of Tsai Ing-wen's 新南向政策. Okay, it's one thing to have this grand vision of reorienting Taiwan to have closer cultural ties with Southeast Asia, but there is actually some problems that YG Xinliang's 社团 have actually explicitly mentioned to Tsai Ing-wen during her presidential campaign, that some of them actually face job discrimination in Taiwan. Okay, and that has something to do with the fact that some of these YG Xinliang actually had their college degrees in their country of origin, but after marrying their Taiwanese husband, they came to Taiwan, and their Wenping, their college degree, is not recognized by a lot of Taiwanese employers. Okay, and since, you know, there's high unemployment rate among, you know, Taiwanese, especially young Taiwanese, they just felt like YG Xinliang would not be their first choice of a potential employee. Okay? And this is especially true with white-collar jobs. Because in Taiwan, there's always this long-standing stereotype that if you are from Dongnanya, from Southeast Asia, that you should be a caretaker in somebody's home, or a housekeeper, or somebody that does factory work, or, you know, service work. But to get a white-collar job, you know, sometimes Taiwanese employers don't seem to accept that too well. Okay, so this kind of job discrimination, whether it's explicit or subtle, is something that Tsai Ing-wen would like to address. Okay, she said, well, we're going to, at least on the governmental level, we would like to fully recognize these 外籍新娘文凭, their college degrees. We would like to fully recognize it on the governmental level and also encourage more Taiwanese employers to employ 外籍新娘, okay, even for white-collar jobs. So, and also some of the reports of mistreatment of guest workers in Taiwan, okay, and this, we all know that in Taiwan, 外劳 has two types. Okay, one type is a kind that work in the private homes within Taiwanese households. They take care of the elderly, because maybe a lot of Taiwanese still don't believe in sending their parents to nursing homes. Okay, so there is a tendency to hire Southeast Asian women, especially young women, to take care of their elderly parents at home. And another type is the type that work on factory assembly lines. Okay, and the ones that works on factory assembly lines tends to be the ones that probably get better benefits, in a sense that whatever mistreatment that they might receive is all out in the open, it's in the workplace. Okay, so their wages are more standardized. Okay, safety standards are better. But for those that work in people's private homes, mistreatment can happen and nobody will know about it unless they complain to people outside. Okay? And then there were also some instances of Taiwanese households or employers withholding or confiscating the passports of their Southeast Asian housekeepers in order to better control them, so they would not, quote unquote, run away. Okay? So all these are instances where, now social media is so well developed, worldwide, any kind of mistreatment could be sometimes magnified, if they, contact their family members or their friends abroad, so that their impression about Taiwan could be affected by it in a negative way. Okay? So I'm not saying all Taiwanese employers mistreat their Southeast Asian employees. It's just that the few cases that were publicized, is not helpful when the new Tsai Ing-wen administration is trying to develop closer ties with Southeast Asian countries. And so, and also there's the societal pressure on children of 外籍新娘 to assimilate and speak Mandarin. Because at least for the younger generation of school age, Mandarin is still the predominant language that most young people in Taiwan use as, language of daily communication. And this is different from, obviously, contradict with Tsai's new emphasis on Taiwan as a multicultural immigrant society. Okay? So Tsai Ing-wen's new vision does not just include, 原住民族 or 客家人 or 福佬人 or those 新移民 post-1949. Okay? She also would like to fully include these Southeast Asians, this 外籍新娘 into the fabric of Taiwan's multicultural immigrant society. Okay? And this is also part of her 新南向政策. Okay? Because she really firmly believes that whatever is happening in Taiwan, and whatever Taiwan is trying to do by expanding its international space in Southeast Asia is all interconnected. You cannot overlook the way Southeast Asians are treated within Taiwan and expect to get a lot of friends in Southeast Asia, in bilateral relationships. So obviously, if you look at the gap between what her vision is for 新南向政策 versus some of the problems and challenges some of these Southeast Asians might face in Taiwan in recent years, then there's definitely a need for Taiwanese citizens to have their attitude and practices modified so that this multicultural vision in 新南向政策 can be more effectively implemented in the future. Okay. So, another strategy that Tsai Ing-wen proposed during her presidential campaign of 2016 is to internationalize Taiwan as a new headquarters, like a home base for transnational NGOs, non-governmental organizations. Okay? As we know that Taiwan is not a member of the United Nations. Okay? So a lot of multilateral and bilateral relationships that's carried out between Taiwan and the rest of the world is through non-governmental organizations. So exchange of ideas and networking among people transnationally that care about the same issues in a civil society on a non-governmental level. So Taiwan encouraged creation of this Hakka Kejia International Non-Governmental Organization to set up their headquarters in Taiwan. Because we know Kejianen is not just in Taiwan or in the United States. They are all over the world, in different countries in Southeast Asia especially. So all these Kejia Shetuan, okay, throughout different parts of the world can all come and have their annual meetings in Taiwan. Okay? And another similar idea she came up with is inviting transnational indigenous peoples NGOs, 原住民族 NGOs, to set up headquarters in Taiwan. And this is a strategy that she devised to overcome some of Taiwan's international isolation through this kind of grassroots diplomacy, 草根外交. And she would also like to elevate the languages of 原住民族, Kejia and Fula Hua to status of national languages, so that they would enjoy the same official recognition, equal recognition as Mandarin. Okay, Mandarin used to be, as we know, 国语, right? But now all these will be 国语, 国家语言, of the same status. And this means standardizing the certification of more teachers that's proficient in teaching Kejia, Hakka, and 原住民族 languages to transmit them to the next generation, okay? So that they won't die out in the future. Because it seems like a lot of young people in Taiwan only speak Mandarin, whether at home or outside of the home. So there's really an urgent need, especially these marginalized languages such as Kejia Hua and indigenous languages needs to be really preserved and transmit to the next generation, like teaching them romanization of 原住民族 languages, for instance. Okay. And then also encourage young people upon graduating from college or high school to return to their 原住民 or Kejia communities to participate in projects of cultural and historical preservation, and also environmental sustainability. And this can be done with grants or small loans from the government and the private sector. And this in turn could stimulate tourism and generate more job opportunities and small businesses in these communities. Okay, so it would solve the problem of young people not having jobs, for one thing, and also narrow the gap between these Kejia Zhuang, they call it, she used the term Kejia Zhuang, and then also 原住民 部落, okay? All these places tend to be more impoverished with higher unemployment rates, and this could really boost and stimulate their economies through cultural preservation, like 保存古迹, okay, and also hiring young people as tour guides, with some certification, and stimulate their economy in their home towns. So we all talk a lot about 正名运动. Okay? 正名运动 is basically the process whereby indigenous peoples would having their names adjusted throughout time. For instance, in the United States, we have 正民运动 as well. You know, if I can recall, back in the 1980s, in the Boston area, people would call people like me like an Oriental, okay? But nowadays, calling people an Oriental is considered almost borderline racist, okay? So we would prefer to be called Asians or Asian Americans, okay? And back in the 1960s, you know, black people were called Negroes, you know, but now, by the 80s, they have this thing about black is beautiful, right? So we begin, you know, being black is proud, so they called themselves black people in the 1980s, okay? And by 1990s, we have African Americans, okay? So, 正民运动 is just like, they used to be called 三地人 or 三胞, which is kind of almost derogatory, you know, not very friendly term. And later on, it's called 原住民 by the 1990s, with the 正民运动. And the most politically correct and modern term that's used in the 21st century is 原住民族. Because a 民族 is like a more politically conscious term that acknowledges their collective identity as an ethnic group that deserve to be validated and recognized, you know, in the international community. So since the late 1980s, President Tsai, obviously, she is aware of this 正民运动, and she would like to represent the entire nation on August 1st to apologize to Taiwan's indigenous peoples and also offer financial compensation for lost land and resources as the first step toward inter-ethnic reconciliation. Okay? And the amount of reparations or financial compensation that will be paid to indigenous communities will obviously be negotiated between the government and the indigenous peoples. Okay? And of course, there will also be an investigation committee that's set up in either Xinzhenyuan or Lifaiyuan to come up with some sort of evaluation as to what is appropriate amount of financial compensation. And this is all part of transitional justice so that 原住民族 can be transformed from passive objects of government's paternalistic policies to become more active participants in self-governance. Okay. Is my time up? Oh, okay, sure. Okay, sure. Okay, so this 原住民族自治法 is something that Tsai Ing-wen's government has worked, you know, with the DPP-dominated legislature right now to come up with, and then it's based on the UN Declaration of Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and these are some of the rights that indigenous people should have, such as self-determination in the use of financial resources and land use in 自治区, and cultural autonomy, and also reduce the inequalities in healthcare, housing, education, and job opportunities in indigenous communities through government subsidies and quota systems, and also validate Pimpuju as a legitimate ethnic group among 原住民族. And this includes government should appropriate resources and step up efforts to reclaim and preserve Pimpuju's languages and culture. Okay? And also stop dumping nuclear waste in 原住民族自治区, such as Lanyu. There's a lot of nuclear waste that was sealed up in barrels and just put in the warehouses in Lanyu. That's 原住民族自治区. Okay, so in order to show respect for 原住民自治区, some people recommend that maybe Taiwan should study the French system of recycling and reuse nuclear waste, you know, instead of just dumping it in and then let it sit there for millions of years. Okay, so basically, that's all I have to say. There's one more slide, but I just wrap it up here. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I know you have well prepared all the slides and should have been in the, as we're running behind. So now we close this section, and but before we do that, I'd like to present you this quote from the organizing committee. And thank you. So this ceremony.
Ceremony next door.
It's next door.
Right now.
Thank you.